straightforward bill, the Health Services Amendment Bill. This matter, perhaps by way of background, is dealing essentially with two, I should describe them as annoying matters. One of them has to do with the proliferation of bush and grass and debris and dumping of garbage illegally around Barbados, and the general untidiness of the country, which I know that all honorable members are concerned about, and we have been speaking about the difficulties in managing this matter. Over the years, government has tried a number of measures. At one stage, the Ministry of Health had a debushing team that worked. I believe the Deputy President would bear me out on this, that every year, 6 monthly, they would go during the rainy season trying to do bush blocks in conjunction with the Ministry of Environmental Health Department. Over time, NCC has taken on this role. Indeed, at this point in time, we have the bushing teams in NCC and in the Ministry of Public Works. But throughout the country, you see the state of affairs of bush and the general untidiness of the society. Ministry of Health, of course, is concerned because with this, it comes public health issues. In the bush, in these areas, you can get breeding of the mosquitoes, and you can have a proliferation of vector-borne diseases. And currently, we do have quite a few. We have dengue, we have chikungunya, and we have Zika, all reported in Barbados within the last year or so. And obviously, there's always a problem of rodents and rats and possibilities of leptospirosis. From perspective of safety, also there's a matter of people hiding in these areas, these dense woody areas and bushy areas, and committing crimes. So and that is definitely a public health concern. The other annoying matter being dealt with in this bill has to do with the, I don't want to say abandonment, but where people have died at the hospital and their bodies have left in some cases for years on claim, no next of kin to be found, and we find ourselves in a hospital that has provision within its morgue, refrigerated storage for about 34 corpses. You find that you have, at this point in time, over 50 not being stored in the hospital, but being stored at 2 funeral homes. I'm not going to call the names, and you're paying something like $35 a day at one and $45 a day at the other. You're paying this as much as $35,000 to $45,000 per month, and I believe one of these goes back to 2020, where there's no one, no next of kin. Admit that they're next of kin. Formerly, it was handled through QVH to the National Assistance Board, but that was meant for people who were destitute in situations of real poverty, where the families couldn't afford to bury them, and provision would be made through the National Assistance Regulators to do that. What we found is that in a lot of these cases, there are relatives, but they don't come to claim these bodies, and we are faced with a mounting bill. And the decision has to be made that we will have to, it's best suited to amend the bill so that the QH would be in a position to go through the process. You have to go through the process of going to the welfare department, trying to identify if after 7 days no one comes to claim the body. The welfare department then has to still go through the process to try to identify. And we're saying that now, rather than leaving it there for months and years, that we need to move to a process where after 2 weeks we give another public notice, and thereafter we might more than likely have to move to cremation. Having said that, Mr. President, the bill is fairly straightforward. It makes provision for administrative penalties and to revise the provisions concerning removal and sanitary disposal of offensive matter, and as I said, to provide for the disposal of dead bodies, abandoned and health services institutions. I should say that this bill went through a whole process of consultations, discussions within the Ministry of Health, Ministry of Housing and Lands, and also the Ministry of Agriculture. And I say agriculture last because during development of it, we all saw Kawich as a major issue. But once there was a meeting with the farmers in Barbados who have large tracts of land, and they spoke about the issues in trying to deal with Kawich and to control Kawich. And we all know it is extremely resilient. We burn Kawich, but the seeds survive. And they germinate again 2 years later, whatever. And they spoke of how expensive it would be for them, and then to be penalized if they're trying to manage it, that they might spend more money and use more laborers in trying to get rid of Kawich as opposed to providing agricultural produce. So that was removed, and we've decided that the Ministry of Agriculture will take on the responsibility, and they will now have a Kawich management unit. Yeah. So that has been taken to the Ministry of Agriculture and removed from this because it would have caused dire strain for the farming community. The matter also went to the Joint Select Committee of Parliament, and I know some members of this Honourable Chamber sat on that Joint Select Committee, and I believe they all signed off in the end, essentially to the bill as it is now. I just want to go briefly through it in terms of some of the amendments in the bill that involves. We've done a few new definitions to reflect contemporary circumstances, although there's still some definitions in here that I think are a little archaic, like night soil that we're still seeing. But nevertheless, it's there. So there were a number of amendments, but most important in this act, it makes provision for the introduction of, normally under the Health Services Act as it now stands, the environmental officers and environmental health assistants will visit the property, will see that you're in contravention to the law, and would warn you, issue warning, written warning, second warning, and eventually third time when nothing's happened, they only would have to go to the court. It becomes a criminal offense. And you could well appreciate that it takes up a lot of time going to the magistrate's court. Person's not ready, the defendant's not necessarily ready, and took up a lot of time. However, we pursued it, and I must say that over the last year or so, there have been about over 30 convictions in terms of people being fined. But we thought that took up a lot of manpower when environmental officers and assistants could be doing more valuable work in the community. And so we've introduced a system, in effect, where people, the administrative fines, a system almost like ticketing. When you get a contravention notice, essentially, that this matter is in breach of the law, you'll be given 21 days to sort it out. Thereafter, the matter of administrative penalties comes into force. Having said that, there's also, you can appeal in certain circumstances. And I must say that certain elderly people and people like this, the Ministry of Health, when they find them, the properties, bushy and all that, we do intervene, because obviously their pensioners and they can't afford to have it sorted out. So it makes provisions for administrative penalties to be imposed for persons in contravention of the Act. And in circumstances where they still refuse, and then the ministry has to get the areas clean, then you will be charged. That is the plan under the amended Act. There are, of course, provisions for people to appeal to these things in terms of assistance, in terms of a relief board. But more importantly, and it is a matter that we have been looking at for several years, certainly when I was last Minister of Health, the matter of persons who you've had to pay, government has had to clear their lots, the matter of putting it onto their land tax bill. And I think the major amendment in here provides for that they will be charged to your land tax bill, and provision is made for that in this Act. And of course, you would appeal then to the land tax board, relief board, if you have difficulties with that. So all in all, it is meant to sort of allow you to have some control and hopefully improve the situation that persons, rather than being penalized and being fined, would be encouraged to clean and clear their lots and maintain them in, I'm not going to say a pristine situation, but as close to pristine as possible, so as to avoid any of these additional charges. As it relates to the disposal of bodies, that was a very simple amendment. That's an amendment of Section 10, delete on Section 10(1) by deleting paragraph U and substituting, adding U5, Roman numeral 5, the disposal of dead bodies abandoned at health services institutions. And that dealt with the interment of the dead, the entry of dead bodies into Barbados, the use of dead bodies for teaching of anatomy to medical students, and the inspection of undertaking establishments, morgues, crematoria, and other places. And we've added that on then, the disposal of dead bodies, so as to make that amendment to allow us to be able to dispose of these bodies. In effect, Mr. President, I certainly don't plan to delay the Senate much on this. I believe it is all straightforward. As I said, the regulations are also there. The matter was discussed extensively in the Select Committee, and I see no difficulty in it. I certainly look forward to it being implemented and to see an improvement in Barbados as it relates to the control of this overgrowth of bush all over the country, and harboring, in some cases, rodents and vectors that transmit diseases. Mr. President, with these few words, I beg that this bill be read a second time.
Thank you, Senator, the Most Honorable Jerome Walker. Senator Worrell.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I rise to make a contribution on the Health Service Amendment bill. Now, Mr. President, this has been on the paper for quite some time, so I'm glad to see that we are finally disposing of this bill today and the amendment, and also that we were graced with the presence of Senator Walcott and him making a contribution on the matter. But what I would have hoped for the opportunity to have a more extensive conversation with regard to the whole process of the environmental health management in this country, which this bill speaks to. And there are some issues, Mr. President, which I would like to address. Because this bill, the amendments here will, for the most part, be enforced by the environmental health officers in Barbados. And I don't think that there's much disagreement with the amendments here, except for the troubling issue of the placement of the penalties on the land tax bill, which for some persons may cause some difficulty. And that was widely debated and discussed as the bill did go to a committee for discussion. And you had a number of persons, lawyers, who would have had some objections to the penalty being placed on the land tax bill and the issues that that might face, especially in a situation where the government is now auctioning off lands for persons not necessarily paying their land tax. And with these penalties going on, yes, we need to deal with the issues of vacant lots not being properly cared for. And I believe that a tidier arrangement could have been done in terms of the enforcement without it having to go through the cumbersome process of putting it onto the land tax bill. And there's also provision in place, because there are provisions already in place within the legislation which may just have needed teeth in order for it to be done, which comes to the ability of the environmental health officers, who for the most part will be the ones policing this legislation. And that is one of the major reasons why you have not had much success in being able to take persons to the magistrate's court or the High Court, I believe it's either the Magistrates Court or the High Court, that you would go to where you have the penalties put on to individuals who do not take care of their properties. That process could have been strengthened. But in order to strengthen that, you need to have the environmental health officers who are there in order to carry out the duties. And that is one of the things which I would have hoped that the minister would spend some time on. Because as you go across Barbados, many Barbadians will tell you that you have not seen an environmental health officer come into your premises with the frequency which they've visited before. If you see them once a year, you probably see them a lot. And I'm hoping that in the wrap-up that the Minister of Health could give some explanation as to why you are seeing fewer environmental health officers going across Barbados. Has there been a restriction placed on the hiring of the environmental health officers, on the promotion of the environmental health officers? Have there been, the numbers been reduced that they can no longer service the districts and the communities which they're responsible for with the frequency at which they have been able to do that before? I know that the environmental health officers work within districts, and the complaint is that the districts that they are responsible for have been increased. The size of the districts have been increased because there are not enough officers to go around. So therefore, where you would normally see a health officer on a quarterly basis, if you see them every 6 months, you're lucky. But right now, the frequency seems to be at least once a year. We know that there are a number of businesses operating which the environmental health officers by law would have to visit in order to make sure that these businesses will be able to qualify for a license for operation, and these things need to be done. But can the minister answer that question? Because it is a burning issue in terms of, one, the hiring of environmental health officers. What are the numbers, especially the junior officers, the promotion of those health officers? Because if you burn out the same officers who are responsible to police the policy, any amendment that we do here today is just a complete waste of time if you do not have the health officers who are able to police the policy. And if you're going to be telling me that a health officer will only be coming in your area once a year or once every 6 months, that is not good enough. And I believe that we are seeing this because the school term only opened yesterday, and today 2 schools are closed. One of them due to rodent infestation. And these are things that the ministry needs to pay close attention to, because if a school has a problem with rodents, they would normally call the polyclinic or the environmental health officer in the area, and they will come to the school and do the necessary baiting, all of those things to help prevent the spread or the infestation of rodents within the schools. So these are things that need to be done. So if the officers are not able to get around as frequently, they will not be able to advise the schools of the necessary steps they need to take, because sometimes it may be a simple visit from the environmental health officer may be able to say to the principals at the school, the janitorial staff, that you may need to pay closer attention to the way how you dispose of the food waste on a daily basis. Or you may need to pay more attention to the way how the children dispose of waste. So these are issues. And then also in terms of the way how the traps and the bait is set across the premises. These are the things that the environmental health officers are trained in and are able to provide that advice to the principals, the general workers at the school, to reduce the incidence of rodent infestation within the schools, so that you would not have so many schools being closed. One was closed last term as well, probably more than one. So these are things that we need to address. You need to see the environmental health officers going through the communities on a more frequent basis, so that they can do the job which they are paid to do. You cannot overburden one or two health officers and expect that they will cover an entire country. You are putting the country at risk. You are putting the health and safety of the country at risk. Another area where it comes up, and the minister mentioned it in terms of dengue, in terms of Zika, all of those vector diseases caused by mosquitoes. And we know the impact that it has on the country. Again, this is the work of the environmental health officers, because going house to in every single community, don't just send them when there is an outbreak, but we should have enough there that they are able to go even before the outbreak to advise the residents of the correct things to do in terms of the plants. Some people have plants around their homes which they do not recognize may harbor mosquitoes. And these are the things that are responsible for a number of communities having persons sick with dengue. And you know the impact it has on the economy, because every year, the doctor's offices, they have a number of persons who come down with dengue, so that's at least a week to 2 weeks off of work, and then it spreads throughout every individual in the household. So it does have a tremendous impact on the economy. Again, this is an area where the environmental health officers, once there are adequate numbers, because we know they do have the training, once you have adequate numbers of persons to go around, will be able to address these issues in terms of cleaning up around houses and cleaning up in communities as well. Then we come to the next issue with this legislation. The government is the chief offender, often for these open lots with courage and with rodents. So the government is oftentimes the chief offender with these open lots. So I'm hoping that you don't just penalize the individual landowners, but you turn the gaze onto the government as well. There's the Glenderry prison that has been a nuisance to the residents in that constituency. And who's the responsibility for that? None other than the government. And even though the residents made a plea for the area to be cleaned up, all of the mosquito infestation in that area is as a result of the Glenderry prison. And the government should take a team in there to clean up the Glenderry prison. I visited in the prison. There was a tour organized for parliamentarians into the prison. And at that time, there were a number of abandoned vehicles and boats inside the prison. Obviously, Mr. President, that is a breeding ground for vermin. And the government needs to take responsibility to clean up that area. Send in a team from MTW, whichever area, or even the residents within the constituency, mobilize a team of persons and allow them to clean up the area, because it would benefit the residents of the constituency as well. There's a drain, a canal following behind it as well. Nothing is done with it. So the government is really the chief culprit in this, and will really be the chief person offending the legislation. So you need to have a focus on the government as well in dealing with these issues. Mr. President, I again come to the penalties on the land tax bill. Now, I would advise anyone that you have a right, as long as you have a property, that you should clean it up, you should keep it clean. But in terms of placing this penalty on the land tax bill, I do not think that it is the correct way to go about it, especially if it would see someone's bill being increased, because as was mentioned, there are a number of persons who may own property who are not necessarily here in Barbados. But they should still make some arrangements to clean up the property. But putting this tax onto the land tax bill, it is not the only solution. And I think that we need to have a more robust environmental health service officers at the community level who will be able to communicate with the persons and get things done in order to get this cleaned up. But if you don't have the environmental health officers coming around on a frequent enough basis to check these things, you would have these problems going on for a long period of time and then dealing with it when it has come to a very difficult stage in order to manage. These are things which need to be done. But the main point that I want to make here, Mr. President, is the environmental health officer. I'm hoping to hear from the Senator Walcott when he wraps up in terms of what is the true state of the environmental health officers section. Are there adequate numbers? Have there been any issues in promotion and hiring of persons? Because we're not seeing sufficient environmental health officers going across the country. And that is one of the reasons why we are having so many problems with rodents and with the infestation across the country. And these are things that need to be addressed. And government also needs to develop a plan. How will it deal with all of its properties which are neglected and abandoned? Don't just sell them to foreign investors or give them away to foreign investors, but at least tidy them up so that the people who are around them will not have to bear the impact of the rodents and the infestation, or that they can make adequate use of those facilities as well once they're tidied up. With those few words, Mr. President, I thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Warren. Her Honour, Senator, the Most Honourable Henrietta Thompson.
I really had not intended to speak, Mr. President. I just want to make a few observations. I'm deeply concerned about the suggestion that government is the principal offender, all responsibility rests with government, government is not acting on its responsibility, and similar statements which emerged either directly or by deductive reasoning in the remarks made by the Honourable Senator who spoke before me. I nearly said Senator Fluffy, sir, but the Honourable Senator who spoke before me. I am concerned that there was no suggestion in the speech at all about the level of personal responsibility that our citizens bear. And I think that we really have to be very careful when we speak from this platform, from this place, when we speak as persons in leadership or an authority or aspiring candidates, that we do not make these suggestions that government carries all the responsibility, but the citizen has no responsibility at all.
On a point of order, Mr. President,
Senator Warren.
I never suggested that the citizens have no responsibility. In my presentation, I said that I would not suggest that persons do not take care of their property. When I spoke about the government, I spoke about the properties being owned by the government, which have a lot of bush and coverage on those properties, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Warren. So noted. Please continue, Senator Thompson.
I contend, sir, that the thrust of the Honourable Senator's speech was that responsibility lies with government. There was a time when I was a child, which is now a long time ago, sir, when average citizens came out and cleaned the space in front of their house. There was a time when people did community cleanups. There was a time when we accepted responsibility and personal responsibility for cleanliness. You used to hear cleanliness is next to godliness. And community care and the way around us looks. These days, you hear the government. It's the government fault. The government need to do it. The government responsible. I can call the nation. I can call the papers. I call in the call-ins. But there is no notion at all that any of us needs to address acts of personal responsibility. There was a time when I lived in Prior Park, sir. The lot next to me, I have never met the owners of the lot. But because it was next to me, because vermin would be running out of it onto my place, and because it was right on the main road, I paid every month. Every month. When I got my lot clean, I paid to keep that clean. Now, sir, there are those who may say, I have more resources. But each of us can do something that keeps around us clean. In the school, when I was a schoolgirl at St. Michael's School, we used to have school cleanups. We were taught that you were not to drop garbage and food all over the school. And we had to clean up. These days, I understand that if you tell children that they have to clean up the school, parents come and say, not my child. What are you doing? My child ain't come in school to clean the place. They got maids, they got general workers. My child ain't here for that. So the children are not taught or encouraged any sense of personal responsibility. I remember, sir, that, yes, at end of term, you had to scrub the desk and help to clean the school. I remember as a very young child, sir, and when I tell you where I was, you will know how long ago this was. I went in Annie Wilson with my mother. So, well, some people here still wouldn't know where Annie Wilson was. I went to Annie Wilson with my mother. Sorry? No, Fogarty's was before me. And Rolla, yeah. I went to Annie Wilson with my mother. And I had a bag of dunks. And I was, a little girl eating these dunks and dropping the seeds behind me. When my mother turned around and saw this trail of seeds, my mother looked at me. She said, Liz, pick up every last one. And my mother walked behind me as I retraced our steps and picked up all the dunk seeds. It was a lesson, sir. It was not to be done. I watched young people and older people, beautifully dressed, they walk the street dropping all kinds of garbage, and their garbage cans along Broad Street. Sometimes you're right, sir, there are 2 steps away, 2 feet from the garbage can. They will still drop it on the sidewalk or in the road. You see lovely motor vehicles driving along, all kinds of things being thrown out of the windows into the communities or wherever they're passing, from fast food boxes and disposable cutlery to unmentionables, sir, coming out of car windows. People don't seem to feel that they have any responsibility because the government got to clean it up, and the government should come behind them and clean it up. Sir, we have to have a different kind of mentality and approach to keeping Barbados clean and to our surroundings. The government does not get sick. The government is you and me. We have to be responsible for personal cleanliness. We have to be responsible for the spaces in which we work. I see people go into offices and leave all kinds of food when they know that the cleaner or the maid isn't going to get in there to deal with it till the next morning. What do they think is going to happen? Roaches, mice, and rats will be the consequence. The same thing is happening in the schools. And quite frankly, sir, I do not understand this notion of schools getting overrun with rats or mice and having to shut down. If you see a mouse, a rat, or a roach in your house, you don't abandon your house and move into a hotel. You deal with it. Schools invariably have votes that they can use. School boards have votes that they can use. Primary schools have votes to which they have access. You have regular maintenance. You call in exterminators on a quarterly basis or half-yearly basis. You teach the children to keep the space clean. You encourage the adults to keep the space clean. And you call the people who provide the services that help you address these things. If you see a mouse, you don't wait till you become overrun with a herd of mice. I don't know what the collective name is. Or herd of rats. It sounds good though. A herd of rats, right? You don't wait. Because once you see a mouse or a rat, you are beginning to have a problem. And therefore you should intervene.
On a point of order, Mr. President, but the Honorable Senator is misleading the chamber by giving the impression that the schools are given their money in a timely enough basis that they will be able to address these things. That is a point of order.
Thank you very much, Senator Worrell. Please continue, Senator Thompson.
On a point of order, sir, whenever you are given your vote, you allocate part of your finances for essential services. And essential in a building that is occupied by a large number of people, where there may be some element of indiscipline in garbage disposal and so on, has to be exterminators and proper cleaning and so on. That is a reality. Sir, people allow their lots to get overgrown. I have to admit that I'm responsible for an estate which has a lot. I don't even know where the lot is. So the grass could possibly be taller than me, sir. That's the truth. I don't know where the lot is. I only know the area in which it is. My sister died, my oldest sister. She has land in Barbados. I cannot point it out. So that there are reasons why people's lots do become overgrown. But I do support adding it to the land tax. The reason being that land tax has to be paid, and therefore the fees for cleanup, which will accrue to government, will therefore be covered by what is now an essential service. Because if people are not prepared to pay and do it themselves, or to do it themselves because people have lawnmowers and weed whackers and stuff, and they could go and clear up. If they're not prepared to do it, then it has to be done if you are going to avoid adverse health impacts, and if you are going to keep the country clean and tidy, and if you're going to maintain your public health standards. So, sir, I just really wanted to say that we have, as a country, to reinforce proper management practices in buildings, whether there are schools or commercial enterprises. We have to encourage personal responsibility for keeping places clean. We have to encourage children to be clean in the way they manage themselves within the school system and how they deal with their waste and dispose of their waste. And we have to encourage all those people who just dump garbage and dump illegally. I live, sir, close to the national landfill. The road to my house, people just come up there, they dump coconuts. If you go up there now, sir, when I passed this morning, there was an old bedstead, a fridge, a stove, a bathtub, several sets of coconuts, and some unidentifiable matter that you would have to search to really give a name to, but a lot of it running a stretch of road, sir, for about 150 yards, where the landfill is perhaps quarter mile away, but people come there and dump. And people who are being paid to carry loads to the landfill dump them illegally. Coconut vendors who make quite a lot of money. There's no tipping fee at the landfill. Coconut vendors who make a lot of money selling coconuts Sundays, and every day now in some instances. They dispose of their shells badly, and they help to breed mosquitoes. They help to breed mosquitoes because the shells, the water gets into the shells, and that is a perfect breeding ground. Sir, even though it is entirely possible to call SSA and EPD and have bulky waste picked up, Barbadians will go to the prison as identified by the Honourable Senator, or to the corner, or to the open lot, and dispose of bathtubs, stoves, fridges, all kinds of old cars, old boats, old motorcycles, all kinds of bulky waste, even though they can get it free, disposed of free by government agencies, even though they can take it to the landfill and have it put in there without having to pay a cent. Barbadians still opt to dump illegally and to have a lot of waste. It is not the government's fault that people are dumping in Glenderry. That is what was suggested, that government responsible for Glenderry and government should do something about it. The government is not dumping in Glenderry. It is people who live in the community or other people who see it as an opportunity to dump illegal who are dumping there. And then they are the ones who end up with chikungunya, with dengue, with other diseases, because you will get vector-borne diseases of various types if you continue dumping like that. So while I concede that government has responsibilities and must act on them, this is a nation that speaks constantly about the rights of individuals and the responsibility of government without talking about the responsibility of the individual to self, to community, and to country, whether that community is their workplace, whether that community is their school, whether that community is their residential community. And I really want to emphasize that government alone cannot keep the country clean, no matter how many public health inspectors you have. It is down to the individual actions and conduct of everybody who lives in a house in Barbados. That, at the end of the day, is the answer to the problem that we have. That is not to say government must not do its work. I would never defend government agencies for not doing what they should. But no matter how many public health inspectors you have, they cannot, with the best will of the world, stop the individual who is determined to put their old stove up in the gully. I went, sir, up to Pico Tenerife. All kinds of garbage is dumped, all kinds of old things dumped all up there. Disgraceful that you could go to a pristine place at the peak of the northern peak of the island, and the only thing you can see to do with it, besides putting out black belly sheep to graze, was to dump all kinds of garbage. Sir, this is who we are, and it is not a good feature of who we are. And I am not going to support any call that says it is the government's responsibility to make us better. It is our responsibility to look in the mirror and ask ourselves who we are as opposed to who we want to be, and what are we prepared to do to address national problems in our own interests, in our own interests. Call on the government to carry out their responsibility, but accept that equally as we have rights, we as individuals also have responsibilities on which we must act. And as a person who has been actively involved in politics since the 1980s and as a candidate since 1991, sir, I am not going to stand here and say to people that they are to get off scot-free. Every time I hear that a school is closed because there's a roach infestation or a rat infestation or somebody see 2 stray mice, I wonder what is going on in terms of the management, in terms of the proper maintenance of building, and in terms of the practices of the people who are occupying the space. And there should be training and educational programs run by the schools in cooperation, or run by the ministry in cooperation with the schools, that helps to alleviate these problems. And heads who are the managers, principals who are the managers, need to be told that this is part of what they are to use their votes for. Some of the secondary schools have thousands and thousands, and in some instances, hundreds of thousands of dollars in the bank, and would not apply them to things of this purpose. The school boards, the chairs of boards and the boards of management are to get involved in this. It is a disgrace for a school to be closed for any kind of rodent or vermin infestation. And it is a disgrace not to the government, but to the people who are the lay managers and who could see about the maintenance and dealing with it, and whose direct practices and oversight of the facilities is wanting, and that is where the problem lies. And I don't want really to offend anybody, but just to draw attention to the fact that we can and must do better. And the fact that it is convenient to some people to get up and point their fingers at the government and say the government is to blame and the government is at fault is wrong. And we must be very careful about what we say to the public, because it is going to come back to haunt us. Somebody will be able to pull that speech in the future, and when the same problem occurs, ask the individual why it is that that problem now exists or still exists. Mr. President, I'm much obliged.
Thank you very much, Senator Thompson. Senator Chandler.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I rise very briefly to support the bill, but equally to treat to a number of issues with respect to the cleanliness, not just of the country, but in particular to our schools. You constantly hear in the news and you hear on social media across the landscape of the country from time to time that a lot of our schools are being affected by what we all grew up knowing as COVID. And I first want to commend the ministry with responsibility for health for having the fortitude to set up the COVID management unit. And why am I saying this? A lot of the issues surrounding COVID manifest not just in the households and businesses, but equally in our school system. Of course, it affects directly our teachers, our students, our ancillary staff, and those who come to do business at the school. And why is this important? I've seen today, funny enough, Mr. President marks exactly 2 months, 8 weeks, having now been at the helm of the Education Ministry. And in that short period of time, even though it feels like a long period of time, I've been able to realize a lot of the issues that sometimes you see on the outer banks of things. When you get closer, they're not as straightforward as they may appear. And therefore, relative to the issue of COVID, I've seen, for example, a number of schools had to be closed recently with respect to being affected by COVID. And I want to break it down into 2 parts. COVID can affect the school if it's in its close proximity, but equally, as I've seen recently, a number of schools were affected downwind, miles away from where COVID was present, because the wind can pick it up and it can take it over a long distance. And the school or schools or households or businesses, wherever it lands, can also be significantly affected. So therefore, Minister Walker, Senator Walker was absolutely correct with respect to the country now has to learn how to deal with COVID, learn how to live with it, of course, and manage it, and it therefore requires us to take a greater role in helping the country itself to be able to manage this process. So one, households have to be, of course, aware how to treat to it, and perhaps, Senator, I'm sure it's in consideration already, the public relations as to how community groups can play their part in being able to help the ministry and the government with respect to the management. But I also want to speak to the issue of cleanliness. Our Deputy President, when she took the floor, made mention of the responsibility that we as a society and ourselves have with respect to cleanliness. And I say that on the basis that when you look to our counterparts in the education system in Japan, at the earliest stage, they take pride, and it's done through school policy, government policy, but they encourage their young people to take ownership in cleaning their surroundings. And why am I saying this? Because one, I'm not saying that we have to go the road of making that a policy, because of course there are different societal realities. But we have to encourage as a country or people at the earliest stage of their development to be able to take pride in their surroundings. Our motto speaks to it. Pride and industry. Pride doesn't only mean being proud of producing the world's greatest cricketers or doing business, etc. Pride also means taking ownership in ensuring that your surroundings are in pristine condition. Issues of deportment, how you conduct yourself. And therefore it transcends many of the areas that we're talking about this afternoon. But I also want to go a bit further with respect to cleanliness. In that short or long, depends on how you see it, Mr. President, 8 weeks in the ministry, I've had to encounter frontally the issue of mice and once or twice rats in our schools. And at the onset, you may think and be tempted to believe that our schools are dirty, and that is not the case. In most of the scenarios where I've gone to these schools and our team have gone to these schools, supported by the vector unit of the Ministry of Health and Wellness, there were surrounding areas of the school plant, or school plants across the country, which were overgrown with bush. And as a result, the vector team pointed out to the ministry that the rats find safe harbor in those areas of bush. And therefore, this bill comes at a time, therefore, when the ministry is frontally ensuring that our teachers and our children in schools can go to school and do work and learn in a conducive and safe environment, and equally trying to make sure that our physical plant is fit for purpose for learning and doing business. And therefore, ensuring that if we really want to wrestle, of course, schools have to be kept clean. We have to continue to do so, particularly in circumstances where a child may leave a banana peel here or may not necessarily put it into the place where he may want or need to put it. They're children, and they'll learn, and sometimes they do things that they ought not to do, but that's part of the development. But we, as the older part of society, have to ensure that our systems can treat to that. And therefore, what we're now seeing, and the team from the Ministry of Health has made it clear, is that we constantly have to ensure that within the schools, that the health and the cleanliness of the facilities, particularly our garbage bins in the facilities, are constantly cleaned and washed. Because why? Rodents find safe harbor in these things. And with respect to the current reality, the ministry has taken a very strong and frontal position to make sure that we will not put the safety of our teachers and students and the public who come to the school at risk. And only today, of course, today is the first day of the teaching of the third term. And as you've heard and as you've seen, there were 2 schools which had to, well, remain closed and will open tomorrow because of vector issues. But I only want to encourage you, Mr. President, and those listening to today's editorial in one of our daily newspapers, which commended the ministry for its action that it took yesterday and this morning. And it said quite clearly that in a mode of transformation, that the ministry has to be commended, and notwithstanding, of course, the natural temptation to say, oh boy, this is the first day of school, we have to ensure that it's open at all costs, that we place the safety of our teachers and students at the forefront. Not our words, Mr. President, but an external entity. And this is really part of the transformation that the ministry is now engaging in. And that, of course, is different from spectacle and theater, where sometimes you may have an issue at a school and persons who ordinarily would not gain any public traction may go and stand in front of a school and pose and have a photo op. I understand the temptation. But in public life, there has to be a time that you rise above partisan lines. And if you want to demonstrate your capacity to be of service to your country, you have to demonstrate that you can lead, but not leading in the wrong direction, Mr. President. And therefore, I just want to commend this bill and ensure that as we move forward, that we can all treat to cleanliness in a way that is comprehensive and fit for purpose for all Barbadians. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Lappin. Senator Maladou.
Thank you, Mr. President. First of all, at the outset, I would like to be absolutely clear that I am fully in support of this bill. With regards to adding the fine onto the land tax bill, I would also like to say I think that is an excellent idea. I think that at the end of the day, the land tax bill is a very interesting instrument. As you know, water rates and land tax affect your ability to transfer property. So by putting the fine onto the land tax bill, adding it onto the what might be arrears, at some point we will collect it. At some point when that property has to be transferred. So I support it completely. I want to make a few comments though, sir. As in your opening general remarks, Senator Walcott made it very clear that what this bill was about, the beautification of the island, and I completely agree with you, completely agree. For our own enjoyment of Barbadians, for our own quality of life, for our tourism-based economy. There was a time when this, when our national anthem perhaps was penned, and it read, "These fields and hills beyond recall are now our very own." I am not a poet, and maybe the songwriter, Senator King, could do a better job, but I fear that we might change those words to something else, which I will not suggest today, but you might, if we don't fix this problem, it is certainly not the fields and hills beyond recall. And the other challenge, sir, that has, why this has come about, a lot of it is that much of our agricultural land, thousands of acres of our agricultural land, which at one point in time was profitable as sugarcane, is not profitable as sugarcane today, and it has fallen into bush. We know that this is a problem. But the more of that land that we can put back into profitable agriculture, or even if it is not profitable and we have in some ways to subsidize it, it may well be cheaper for us to subsidize local agriculture as a substitute for import, as well as avoid having to debush all of this land, as well as to avoid all of the vector control and the other issues that we have with it. I would much prefer to see an unprofitable field of something than a big field of bush that I have to pay for the same cost just to keep it clean. But sir, there are three other areas within this bill that I would like to draw specific attention to, or perhaps attention that they were not mentioned specifically, or maybe not emphasized as much as I would like to see. Sir, there are hundreds, if not closer to 1,000 or maybe more, derelict vehicles all over this island. And I think that we need to address that somewhere. I thought perhaps this might have been the piece of legislation that we could have addressed it. And what I would like to suggest is that, because those derelict vehicles, all of them, many of them, have also toxic chemicals in them that are left in it, whether it be the oil or the hydraulic fluids or the plastics or the various things. And over time, as they deteriorate, they create a second problem, not just a place where that can harbor these vectors and look unsightly, but it also is permanently damaging the environment that we're in. But sir, all of these vehicles have chassis numbers, and we all know who it was last owned by. And I don't plan today, sir, to tell you what that legislation should look like, but I'm suggesting that we could perhaps look at this, and we could recognize that when a vehicle is removed off the road, which was a requirement, it used to be, because you would tell the chief licensing officer that you're removing the vehicle off the road, you would have a certain period in which to then demonstrate that it has been disposed of in some way, okay? And if it is not, and if we find this vehicle that we are going to have to remove, and we see it all over the island, I see there are cleanups being done from time to time, right where I live in my area there in Cottrell, I think they call it, there's been litters of vehicles on the side of the road for a long time. They've been cleaned up by government, at government expense, I believe, many times. But each one of them has a chassis number, which can be identified back to the last owner. And if it was not the last owner, that means it was transferred ownership without it being recorded. So I would go that way as well. And I'd like to suggest that the derelict vehicles is something that we could also look at. We as a country, we as a people cannot be proud to see the amount of, a derelict vehicle is just as bad as any other piece of garbage that you can leave around the place. In fact, it's probably worse. The second area, sir, that I would like to touch on, which I have touched on before, and I will say that I have been cooperating with the Minister of Health on this and through members in the ministry, but I would like to use this public forum to speak about an alternative solution to the control of mosquitoes on the island. And I personally got involved in this 9-10 months ago and have suggested that there are other solutions other than fogging. There are solutions that are now proven around the world in Brazil, they're proven in Florida, and if you can get something past the Ministry of the Environment in the United States of America, chances are it might be good enough for us here, that we can control the Aedes aegypti mosquito without fogging and killing everything else indiscriminately, and perhaps even hurting ourselves when we have to breathe in that, what I believe it is, sometimes raw diesel that's been vaporized in order to do it. So I do hope that the ministry will continue what started, but perhaps is not moving at the pace that I would like to see it at, into the investigation into alternative ways of controlling the Aedes aegypti mosquito. The most recent literature written on this, and I'll quote from it, came from the website of the firm called Oxitec, which has been doing all of this work in the genetic modified mosquitoes, which simply cannot reproduce. And once it can't reproduce, that means that the entire population very quickly is eradicated. But on their website, Oxitec, it says, unfortunately, existing methods of controlling Aedes aegypti, such as spraying or fogging using chemical insecticides, have failed to prevent the spread of disease. This is particularly because Aedes aegypti has developed resistance to insecticides, rendering many common chemicals less effective in controlling the mosquito. It is also an aggressive day biter and thrives in urban environments. So I do hope, sir, my second point is that we would look at alternatives to the widespread fogging, which, as I've mentioned before, has its own drawbacks. Lastly, a subject that I've spoken on, but again I think is relevant to the bill in front of us, Mr. President, is drainage. The problems with drainage, again, which have come about when we were a manicured island of agriculture and you had profitable plantations, they were all working hard to keep the suck wells clean. I've spoken about this before many times, and I was hopeful in the same way that we can find a fine to place on someone who is not cleaning their land, and they should, and they have a responsibility. And as Senator Thompson has said, this is a personal responsibility. It's not the government's responsibility. You own that land. You have a personal responsibility to your neighbor, to yourself, to your family. But in the same way that we can fine someone for bad behavior, can we not do the same thing and reward those for good behavior? And if you have land and it has suckwell on it and you keep it clean, you should be rewarded. You are doing a national service. You're capturing the rainwater. You're putting it back into the aquifer. And the same, Senator Thompson reminded us in an earlier presentation today when we were speaking about large ocean states, the responsibility of the sea and all of that we have a responsibility. We have the ability to capture that water. If we do not do it, the runoff from that, it takes the topsoil with it. It catches at different times in pools. It breeds the mosquitoes. It feeds the rats, etc. Let us, again, I am calling, this time through the Minister of Health, Senator Walcott, that we could have an incentive on those landowners who have the suck wells, which are so well documented within the ministry, that if they are kept clean, there's an incentive for doing that. You're doing a national service to the country and doing that. So those are the three things I wanted to mention about in this bill, sir. But, sir, before I close, a number of people, I believe, Senator Blackman rose to speak about discipline and the challenges. I believe another senator spoke about it as well. Sir, this is the first opportunity that I'm having to speak since there have been a number of very horrendous crimes, I would say, in Barbados. I don't know how else to say it. Gun crimes. And I personally feel, I want to go on a limb here with you today, and I want to tie this back to what we're talking about in terms of discipline, is that when we get to the point of a gun crime in Barbados, that is the end of a long period of indiscipline. That's not the problem there that we need to solve. And when I think about that, and while I may have gotten your applause there just now, I suspect I won't get it for this one, I want to say to you that this government has won 2 general elections, 30 love. It has won a by-election, 1-0. It has won 61 of the last 61 seats that were up for offer. In fact, the current leader of the opposition in the other place was elected on the current government's slate. That mandate that this government has had, they have used it many times, sir. They've spoken about it many times. They have used it to do what is essential immediately. And when I sit here in this Senate, sir, today the 59th sitting, by my estimation, we have passed approximately 100 new pieces of legislation or changes to legislation, 100. And if you look at those, I could be wrong, so if you go back and add them, I'm wrong, I apologize, but it's about 100. If you actually look at them, you can tell from that what the government's legislative agenda is, the things that they choose to focus on, sir. I assume I will be right in saying that. That's what they have chosen to focus on. So here's where I will go out onto a limb and say, what would happen, what would I do, sir, if I had that 61-0 mandate? I had that authority. What would I choose to do? What if I was king for a day? Is that how they say it, right? What if I was king for a day? And, sir, for me, if I one day and I had one thing that I could do, I think I would want to address the issue of crime in Barbados. And as I said earlier, I believe that that has come from indiscipline that starts very early. And I have seen it as it works its way from lateness into the school, not dressing properly into the school, not being corrected in the school. When I went to school at Harrison College, that great place in Crompton Street, thank you. Excellent. I know. I know exactly the audience I'm speaking to. That great place, Harrison College. I could not be found walking across as a boy in short pants, walking anywhere in that school with my socks had fallen down below my calves. That story of pull up your socks, I mean, it means many things, but it meant something there. Those socks had to be up. We had to wear garters. You had to have those socks up. That was the level of uniformity, of discipline that you had to have. I don't see that today. Even when you went to play soccer, play football, as I call it, to play football at lunchtime, by the time you ran around for 2 or 3 minutes, your socks were done by your ankles. But before you left that field and went back to the classroom, pull up your socks. The level of indiscipline then doesn't only find there, it carries through, sir. It carries through. And we see, and I'm going to give a few examples. Roadside vending. At what point are we going to do something about that? That's indiscipline. It's breaking the law. The vendors are taking over a lane now from us. How many more times, sir, am I going to have to hear of 53 convictions of a ZR driver and he continues to drive, sir? That is indiscipline. All of this indiscipline is throughout the society. So by the time you get the motorcycles and the all-terrain vehicles, or whatever they call them, doing wheelies up and down the highway all the time, sir, at what point in time are we going to deal with this? And don't think that I want to leave the white-collar crimes out of it. The level of indiscipline with paying their VAT, paying NIS, or even the land tax. What are we doing about it? It's ridiculous when we can see in the newspaper that we're having to auction properties where they haven't paid land tax for 15, 20 years, or given moratoriums on people who haven't paid their NIS payments for 5, 10 years. It's indiscipline. So don't go to the last part and find when someone uses a gun. Remember that the indiscipline started a long time before that. And if we want to be a disciplined society, and I heard Senator Blackman today quote about Japan. I have heard many times within this room, within this Senate, this honorable Senate, sir, I've heard comments about Singapore, how we want to aspire to be like that. But truthfully, sir, that's not what we want, you know. If you actually look at the laws we pass and what we enforce, that's not what we want. We don't want that discipline. We want the sweets of it, though. We want the success of it. But when it comes to the discipline of enforcing the laws, of following the rules, that doesn't seem to be what we want. And it's just the same following the rules of cleaning up your lot, being a good neighbor. Come on. If that is really what we want, let's go back to, if I was king for the day, what would I do? What would I do? Sir, I would do one thing to start. It would really be 2 things, but the first thing I would do, and the only thing that I would focus on, is I would suggest to you that we in Barbados today need a very simple law that says if you commit any crime with a firearm, it is mandatory life imprisonment without the chance of parole. Period. Any crime committed with a firearm, mandatory life in prison without parole. In my day, in my world, if I was king for a day and I did that, maybe after 2 or 3 years, perhaps the gun crime would have gotten to the point where I could then suggest to law-abiding citizens who are the owners of guns that it would then be time for us to get rid of all guns in Barbados. But only then. That's not the first step. Because if you make that the first step, all that will happen is that law-abiding citizens will have no guns and the criminals still will. The first step is mandatory life imprisonment without the chance for parole for anyone who commits a crime using a firearm. That's what I would do if I had the mandate. 61-0 in 2 general elections and 1 by-election. That's what I would do. What I would do with it. Welcome back, sir. So, Mr. President, I have spoken my 3 suggestions on the health services, and I have made my point with regards to discipline. I have supported all those senators, and with those few words, I'm obliged to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Senator Malado. Senator Reverend Charles Norris.
Mr. President, I rise to give my support for this matter that is now before this chamber.
Can I get more votes on that?
But I I'm a bit disappointed, sir, that I have to start where I'm starting. And that is to condemn a situation in which the government is totally blamed for a lot of the indiscipline that is going on in Barbados, especially in terms of cleanliness. Environmental officers, there are no environmental officers, so the government is to blame. Outside the streets, the dirty, the government is to blame. But I want to say, sir, that there are one or two things that we are missing. I believe that constitutions everywhere give persons the right to property. But equally, we are also human beings, social beings, who depend on and relate to one another. Even though we have these constitutional rights, we also have a responsibility towards one another. That is where our relationships and interdependence comes in. And I believe that if we have the right to own property, we have the responsibility to keep that property clean. A responsibility to ourselves, because one, it is ours, and as you know, cleanliness is next to godliness, even next to goodliness. But you also have a responsibility to your neighbor, the other property that is beside you. Because if you fail to keep your own property clean, you not only devalue your property, but you also devalue the property of your neighbor. And that is where, in my view, responsibility comes in. But sir, as Senator Malilu said, this thing started right before our very eyes, and we allowed it to happen. I want to take our minds back to the schools. I'm sure Senator Monroe Knight will understand what I'm saying. Some time ago, a principal said to a child, pick up that piece of paper. I don't know if y'all remember this, sir. And the child refused and talked about rights. And the child brought in the parents. And there was confusion at the school. I know, sir, because I used to teach evening class, adult education classes there. There was confusion in the schools. And then we had child rights advocates, not the bona fide ones, sir. The ones who appointed themselves as child rights advocates, going to the school and telling the children that they don't have to do it, including some of the parents. So some of us adults are encouraging the students and the children in this type of untidiness. And now it has reached this stage. I remember it very well, sir. I remember. You may not, but I do. That's why I did history. So when I was going to school, it was a joy to have to clean the desks and the benches. We used to go and... You know, Charles loves somebody. and exactly. You used to see, you know, sometimes you would see a desk marker. Gregory loves Elizabeth. Mr. President, sir, I'm sure that you will want to protect me. You used to see that. But seriously, I used to take delight in going in the bathroom, or toilet we used to call it, changing our clothes on the wrong side, and coming back and cleaning the furniture, the desks, and the benches on which we sat. That was fun for us. But it was also part of our upbringing, because right in the school there was a sign, cleanliness is next to godliness. We have come through we have taken a long journey with all of this. We have people living here with their properties not clean. There's also the people who live overseas and the property is not clean. But I also know of persons who live overseas. Their properties are cleaned every month. And the one beside them belong to locals are untidy, are not clean, are bush. And yet, we want to blame a government for everything that goes wrong in this country. The firearms, we want the shooting, the crime, we want to blame government for. I agree with Dr. Senator Malou. When it reaches that stage, they should be punished. I don't believe in hanging those, sir. So I agree with you. Just put them in prison for life. I know that students in our school, sorry, I went on a bit too fast, but sir, I also know that some sort of penalty needs to be placed on those who do not take care of their properties. I have no problem with attaching it to the land tax bill. But to suggest that you should not attach it to the land tax bill, but ask the people overseas to clean their land, but this is the very reason you're putting it on the land tax bill, or anybody anywhere to put it on the land tax bill. So I agree, sir, with this legislation which seeks to bring not only some sort of discipline, but make people aware of their responsibility. There's always the issue of rats. And I am sure that the Honorable Senator of the Opposition is well qualified to speak about rats. I have no doubt. I have no doubt. And if there's some in Parliament, they need to be removed too. I'm sure he would agree with me. But it is also our responsibility to ensure that every building is kept clean of rats. And I'm sure that the citizens of this country will ensure that every building is kept clear of rats. But you want to blame, again, the government. Are you sure, sir, it is the government responsible for the rats? Are you sure? So I want to say to you, to entire Barbados, that we need, there are some things that worked for us in the past. There was nothing wrong with them. Yes, like Santa Maria, I hear people talk about Singapore. I hear people talk about how things are done, how clean it is. There was a time, sir, when I read it, and somebody wrote about it in the papers, when they could not even chew chewing gum, and if those who, they still can't. Because people were taking the chewing gum and sticking them on to places, to seats. Are we prepared to do those things? And these are the questions we have to ask ourselves. When we talk about discipline, are we prepared to do the things that are necessary for good behavior, for human cleanliness? Are we prepared to encourage it? Because if we can't encourage it, and if we encourage indiscipline, then we will only reap havoc. So, sir, I want, with those few words, to lend my total support to this bill. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Senator Morris. Senator, the Most Honorable Jerome Walcott.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to thank all honorable senators for their contributions as relates to this important bill. I have taken note of the comments and the queries of the Leader of Opposition in this chamber, in this honorable chamber. Suffice it to say, we are active recruiting environmental officers and environmental health assistants. And that perhaps he has any in his, well, he's canvassing in St. Michael's Central, now that he's left St. John, perhaps he can certainly get the information to the Ministry of Health, and we will see how we can accommodate him. Knowing that he obviously shows a keen interest in matters of environmental health and indeed food safety and good cleanliness and hygiene as it relates to food businesses. I would not sit here and allow the hard-working environmental officers of the Vector Unit to be criticized unduly, because they go beyond, well beyond the call of duty to ensure, you can hear me? Mr. President, I know you can hear me. Well, I get the impression that the honorable member is a little hard of hearing since the shouting yesterday evening that he had to endure. But I accept everything that's been said, and certainly I hope that this bill will work in the best interest of Barbados. I visited Rwanda a couple of years ago, and I was fascinated in terms of how clean Rwanda, Kigali is, and learned that there's a project. Government takes the lead. One Saturday every month, every Rwandan is expected to come out and clean the area around their house. And you can see, when you fly into Kigali, you can see the difference that this has made. The point that you were making, Senator Malalu, that it is every individual who has a role to play in this process. As related to derelict vehicles, the Act already covers that, but that is dealt with by EPD, utilizing the Health Services Act. And they have a portal on their website, I'm told, that in which you can go on it live and report derelict vehicles and derelict houses and give the information, and they act on it subsequently. Your suggestion regarding subsidized agriculture is an interesting one, and one that perhaps merits some further discussion. But all in all, I want to thank you all for your words of support, and I assume that they are saying so in words of support. I assume naturally that the opposition leader in here is supportive of this bill, and I want to thank them all, and I beg that this bill be now read a second time.
The question is that this bill be read a second time. Will those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. President, I do beg that Your Honor do not leave the chair and the Senate resolve the subject committee for further consideration of this bill.
The question is that I do not leave the chair and the Honorable the Senate resolve the subject committee for further consideration of this bill. Will those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
The Senate is now in committee. So,
Move that clause 1 stand part.
the question is that clause 1 do now stand part. Will all honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it. Clause 2.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that clause 2 stand part.
The question is that clause 2 do now stand part. Will all honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it. Clause 3.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that clause 3 stand part.
The question is that clause 3 do now stand apart. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it. Clause 4.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that clause 4 stand apart.
The question is that clause 4 do now stand apart. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it. Clause 5.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that clause 5 stand apart.
The question is that clause 5 do now stand apart. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it. Clause 6.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that clause 6 stand apart.
The question is that clause 6 do now stand apart. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it. Clause 7.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that clause 7 stand apart.
The question is that clause 7 do now stand apart. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. And those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it. The schedule.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that the schedule be the schedule to the bill.
The question is that the schedule be now the schedule to the bill. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that you do now report to His Honour the President the passing of one bill in committee.
The question is that I do now report to His Honour the President the passing of one bill in committee. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, please say no. The ayes have it.
The chairman has reported to me the passing of one bill in committee.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill be now read a third time.
The question is that this bill be read a third time. Will those honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill do not pass and be cited as the Health Services Amendment Act 2025.
The question is that this bill do not pass and be cited as the Health Services Amendment Act 2025. Will those honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. This bill is now passed and so cited. Senator, the Honourable Dr. Chantal Munro-elect.
Mr. President, that brings us to the end of government business for the day. I beg to move that the Senate do now adjourn until Wednesday, April 30th at 11 a.m.
The question is that the Honourable Senate do not adjourn until Wednesday, April the 30th at 11 a.m. Will those honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. This Senate is therefore adjourned until Wednesday, April the 30th, 2025 at 11 a.m.